Hello, I'm Melissa Chan and I'm guest hosting the Stream Home edition. Today we're going to be talking about endangered languages. There are some 5,000 to 7,000 languages out there, depending on how you count it. And 50 to 90% of it, it's estimated, could be gone by the end of the century. We'll take a look at why and speak to some of those who are working to preserve these languages. As always, on YouTube, post your comments and questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible so you too can join the stream. Welcome to our guests today. We have David, we have Wiradjuri, we have Bidasigekwe. If you can each introduce yourselves to everyone. Let's start with David.
Hi, Melissa, and good morning to all our viewers. My name's David Harrison. I'm a National Geographic expert, and I study language and endangered languages, and I work with last speakers of language in the world to help them save their languages.
David, you broke up there, so I'm going to let the viewers know that you are affiliated with National Geographic. Now, Bidasigekwe, introduce yourselves to everyone.
Aha. Buju ginawa Bidasigekwe Indigenous Kakabikan Indunjiba Makwa Indudem. Hi everyone, my name is Bidasigekwe. I am from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and my clan is Bear. And I work at Bidote Learning Center, which is an immersion school located in South Minneapolis.
Wiradjuri, tell us about yourself.
Tēnā koutou e ngā mana, e ngā reo o te ao, e mihi ana ki a koutou. My name is Wiradjuri Hond. I come from Taranaki, which is one of the provinces in New Zealand, Aotearoa, and most of my work and effort has been in community-based language revitalization efforts, and that's very much where I work now.
It's very interesting with these languages that are being threatened. About 1/3 of all the languages out there have fewer than 1,000 speakers. And it's just a big challenge in this day and age to maintain them. David, I'm curious, where are some of the regions that you see around the world that are most vulnerable to losing languages?
Melissa, I've been studying language diversity worldwide. We've noticed that it's not evenly distributed. So there are what you could call language hotspots, which are areas in the world which have extreme diversity of languages. And there are global forces that are pushing languages into extinction. But fortunately, there are also strong local forces fighting to save languages. And I really do compliment my fellow guests today, Bikwe and Rua, who are language warriors who are fighting to save their own languages. So it is a dire situation globally as we see almost half of the world's 7,000 languages threatened with extinction, but hopeful signs that languages are being revitalized.
I want to put everything in context here. I've pulled up a Washington Post article. It's super interesting because of the graphics on it. Take a look. It says nearly 2/3 of people speak one of these 12 languages as their native language. You see Chinese, Arabic, Spanish, Hindi, Urdu, Bengali, English. No surprises there. And then look at this next page from the same article. English is by far the most commonly studied foreign language in the world. So if you have two people speaking two different endangered languages, for example, and they meet, they're most likely, if they wanted to communicate, most likely to have English as a shared language. To what extent, I wonder, is the fact that there are these main languages, the fact that they're pushing out the ability for people to practice languages with a smaller population of people? I'm curious about how Wiradjuri thinks about this in your work.
So quite obviously having global languages associated with government and the economy definitely has an impact on local languages, but I suppose I don't focus so much on the numbers of speakers. For me, it's not about having a million speakers or 100,000 speakers. It's more around the quality of the interaction that takes place, the intergenerational transmission. And a language can survive with a relatively small population as long as the quality of the transmission and the maintenance of that language as a part of the shared identity is strong. So focusing on numbers sometimes is a huge distraction, and we feel that because we don't have as many speakers, then we're not doing as well. But I tend to focus on the quality of the interaction and the intergenerational transmission.
Bida Sigekwe, I'm curious, do you agree with what Wiradjuri says? Do you think it's more about quality, not quantity?
I completely agree. There's a lot of instances where we've seen language that lays dormant for a long time, but as long as we get quality language that's being, maintained and secured in like a great variety of resources that was documented, you can definitely bring back a language to thrive. I do believe that as long as we have quality language that is being given, I don't see any way that it couldn't survive.
I'm curious about what you think in terms of why this is happening. There's a lot being written about in terms of the fact that urbanization is a contributor to people losing languages. The language that they speak in their village or area, rural area, and they go into the big cities and they end up speaking whatever everyone else is speaking in the city. So there's urbanization, there's globalization. There's also technology, and technology can be both a good thing or a bad thing. It's bad that Google Translate determines which languages they want to include, right? But it's good because you have apps like Duolingo where people are learning languages. So technology is something that I'm curious about in terms of how you guys think about it as a positive or a negative. David, I see you nodding, so why don't you jump in?
Well, technology per se, it can be a great platform to expand a language. I have developed a platform called the Talking Dictionary, which is the first ever presence on the internet for now nearly 200 endangered languages. And these communities are using it to increase their presence. I also want to comment briefly because you had a factoid on the bottom of the screen saying that half the world's languages have no written form. That is presenting writing. Most of the world's languages are oral, and we in literate cultures, we tend to think of if you don't have writing, you're lacking something, you're deficient somehow. But oral cultures are amazing and astonishing in what they can do with their mind. I met of tales who speak an unwritten language, and they can recite 10,000 lines of an epic story. They can do things that seem miraculous to those of us. And so there's a significant trade-off between adopting writing in a language and other cultural things that you might lose. It's not a one-way progression that all languages should adopt writing.
And normally, what we've seen in the past is that there tends to be a view that a language without a script that is just oral is looked down upon, unfortunately. I want to bring in some of the comments that we have seen on YouTube. Jeremy Sinsimer says that Hebrew and Hawaiian are examples of languages successfully brought back from extinction or the threat of extinction. Why did they succeed when so many other attempts to save indigenous languages fail? Let's hold on to that thought, and let me go to two tweets that have also been written. Presently, I'm having the same challenge, so I made sure my children learn to speak my Nupe language, which is in Nigeria, at a very younger age at home. In fact, it's now compulsory for them to speak Nupe. That's actually something that I personally also experienced. I was not allowed to speak English at home. It was Cantonese and Mandarin Chinese only. Here is somebody else, Jesse G. 444 saying, I thought about that sometime back. I think as a way to save them, we direct the same energy and resources as the English language. I mean, dictionaries, computer, digitalization, if the language, with the aid of the people who are still in grasp of the language. Wiradjuri and Bida Sigekwe, I'm very curious about your method of educating. What do you think about what people have said about starting from the home, and that being a very important component? Birasigekwe?
I think it's really important. I mean, ideally, you're setting up a nest for your family at home where you realize and recognize that this is a place where it's safe to speak your language. And you don't have the outside impeding in on who you are and what your identity is when you speak your language, your heritage language. I think it's very important. And I love that everybody has commented so far. And I do think they're on the right path for everything they've said.
Ruakere, you think so too?
Oh, well, absolutely. I think we need to start raising our children in these languages so that it becomes a natural and a normalized language in those communities. But returning back to the earlier comment, having a written language or having a large corpus of the language is really important. However, at the same time, sometimes when we focus so much on the written form, we focus on the language as something separate from the communities themselves. And so that's something that's happened with Māori language. There's been so much emphasis on the language, understanding grammar and structure and the building the corpus, that in many ways we've left out one of the most important ingredients, which are the communities of speakers that need to maintain the language. And so we're really only coming to terms with how we can re-engage communities again with that language today here in this country.
And I want to bring in another comment at this time. You're talking about communities. Here is a comment from YouTube, Aina Abdul Fattah, saying, I personally believe that colonialism has a great role to play, especially in Africa. I am a Yoruba tribe in Nigeria. I hardly understand some native words. As a father, how do I teach my children? And that leads me to the community video submission that we have from Gracien Atindogbe. He's a professor of African linguistics from Cameroon. Have a listen.
The legacy of colonization on African languages is the adoption by the newly independent nations of the languages of the former colonial masters. With this linguistic policy, parents compel their children to learn those languages and only those languages at the expense of the mother tongues.
So there's a darker
that's
element.
Absolutely right.
Yes. Go ahead, David.
And I love the examples from Africa. And the person who tweeted said they were from Nigeria. You know, Nigeria is part of a language hotspot. It has immense language diversity, more than 500 languages. I've been speaking to a friend of mine, Mfon, who's a Nigerian linguist. He's a speaker of Ibibio, which is a language with millions of speakers. In the first years of school, his entire in the 4th through 6th grade, it was entirely in English, and they were discouraged from speaking the mother tongue. And then as soon as he reached the 7th grade, they were not only discouraged, but they were punished by being beaten or being forced to perform hard labor if they were caught speaking their mother tongue. So the irony is that he still speaks both languages, and he didn't need to give up Ibibio in order to the right encouragement.
Yeah, so institutions and government have a big role to play. When you think about colonialism, it is about institutions and how governments decide what languages are important. I think about these days, of course, some of the headlines is China trying to impose teaching and preventing Mongolian from being taught. They have, of course, also trying to control the language in the Xinjiang territory where there are Turkic Uyghurs as well, and of course Tibetan for quite a number of decades. And so I really am curious, Ruakere and Birasigekwe, about your respective languages, because they were essentially a victim of the institutions and the governments in place. Ruakere, can you just let people know a little bit about the history?
So Māori language was definitely, there were efforts used by the government to ensure that Māori language wasn't maintained. So just as David has just explained, in Nigeria, the language in 1867, you could only get funding for schools if you only spoke English. And then probably about 70 or 80 years ago, punishment for speaking Māori was still very much the norm. So the sense that a government needs one national language and all of the other languages can just make it on their own is a common theme, I think, around the world. The sense of nationalism associated with one common dominant language is something that denies the voices, denies the identities of localized communities. And quite often we associate ourselves in moving ahead in the world with leaving behind that diversity. And it certainly was the case in Aotearoa in New Zealand.
And when you look at languages that are dying, I want to pull up a video of Cristina Calderon. She's over 90 years old. She's the last person on earth who speaks this language called Yagan. Have a listen.
Sometimes I think about what I was going to say, and then I don't remember. I used to speak Yagan with my sister when she was still here, but my sister died. Her children did not learn Yagan. None of my nephews learned. I have no one to speak to. That's how it is. It's a shame to not be able to speak Yagan, because I really miss it.
Melissa,
And another comment from... oh, go ahead.
Christina's story is very touching, of course, and I've met many speakers around the world who are truly the last languages. And the language becomes silent, it becomes invisibilized. People in the community have a sense of loss or regret or nostalgia. It may take a generation or two before they come back and realize the value that it has for them. But her story is very common among last speakers.
It's very heartbreaking. And on YouTube, we have another comment from Expecto Patronus. Language is important. It is the most important symbol of one's culture. The issue cannot be overlooked. Just because we have more pressing issues like climate change, they have their own importance. And I think that really echoes what you just said, David. So looking at what can be done, I also want to share another community video that was shared with us from Nayeli Mulato and Anya Spilker. They're founders of Zaloa Languages in Mexico. This is what they have to say.
In Mexico, there are 68 indigenous languages and over 300 dialects, most of them in danger of disappearing.
While in many other countries of the world, indigenous languages are already extinct, in Mexico we still have the chance to learn them.
We made it part of our mission to encourage others to learn those languages.
And this is the first step to break barriers and to make indigenous people feel proud again of their heritage.
Those languages show the heritage and show the beauty and Mexican diversity, and by preserving them, we also preserve all the beautiful traditions that come with them.
Bida Segekwe, I'm curious, what are methods that have worked for you in terms of teaching the language that get young people engaged?
I just want to, kind of a comment that I have. So everyone has talked about how oral proficiency has been more of there's a lot of languages that are oral, and it's been a tough transition to making them more about literacy for the language. Ojibwe language is one of those languages that it was almost entirely oral speaking, and the literacy is just now starting to be like this a thing that we teach the students. And, it's a new age kind of thing. And I think with the oral speaking, what comes into hand is you get all these cultural teachings and remembering where to fall on them. I mean, one of the comments that you had earlier was about climate change. If you rely on your language for oral practices and that language that falls in hand with it, you will get teachings from your elders or resources that were passed on from generation. And those teachings can teach you about climate change or how to take care of your community. I mean, it's those things that you can genuinely fall on to take care of yourself and your community altogether. That's what we do with immersion teaching. It's an experiential learning. We use all those cultural teachings to teach our kids what was passed on to us.
That's very interesting. So it's very holistic. Ruakere, is that the same experience you have in terms of getting younger people engaged? It's not just about the language. It's very holistic.
Well, so much focus goes on language acquisition, And in many cases, for us, we've become very good at teaching language, but we're not very good at using language. And so establishing those immersion environments are absolutely what's needed within our environment in New Zealand and Aotearoa. But the key point is that if we wait until children are school age, or if we wait until we're adults to start learning a language, it's hugely inefficient. It's far easier to establish a language when children are picking up their languages in the first instances and expose them to communities or domains where languages are normalized as a part of culture and identity, and they pick it up so much more quickly and so much more, the integrity is so much stronger for them as they grow up. So rather than focusing on learning a language, and I'm not saying that we don't do that, I'm just simply saying we can't leave aside the importance of the immersion domains outside of the learning environment, and sometimes we leave those behind, or we don't put enough effort into those spaces that carry culture and identity.
Yeah, it goes
Melissa,
back to that question that was asked. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I'd like to pick up on Bidasagekwe's really wonderful point about the environment and climate. We need language diversity just as we need biodiversity for a healthy planet, for a healthy society. And most of what humans know about the environment, plants and animal species that are not yet known to scientists, are well known and well understood in indigenous languages and cultures. And so without those languages, we are missing a huge chunk of the human knowledge base, and we're missing the ability to take care of our planet without that knowledge.
And it's very interesting. I was just going to say that in many ways, that question that was asked on YouTube earlier, how do I teach my children, is in many ways, based on what you guys have said, the wrong question to ask almost. That it isn't just about going into a classroom, and it's about so much more. David, I do want to follow up on that. What if a parent does ask you that, though, what would you say to them?
About the importance of transmission? Yeah, generational transmission is how languages survive, and it has to be incentivized. And oftentimes, we underestimate the amount of agency that children have in deciding whether to keep a language or not. If you create the right social conditions, children will make a rational choice and they will keep a language. If you make them feel ashamed of their identity, will give up the language.
Okay, we're nearing the very end of our show, so I want to go to each of you to ask if you can say something in the language that you teach and you specialize in and what it means. Let's start with Ruakere.
Nohora mai koutou, I runga no I tēnei ipurangi I enei whakawhitiwhiti kōrero. That I just explained the, said farewell, but also the using the word ipurangi, which is our word for internet, the sense that the internet is a coming together as a source or a container for language.
Got it.
So, tēnā koutou.
Bidasagekwe, your final thought.
G'day ekado miraso ekadoanan apade edaso bishik minawa gigawabmin ginawa language bisandoyan. I would like to say that speak 10 phrases at home every day. If you have 10 phrases, you can use those and rely on those and then build from there. And then I also want to say thank you for having me, and Gigawabamin, I'll be seeing you.
David, your quick sentence.
In Tuvan, the language of the nomadic yak herders, when you're saying farewell, you say Orung Akbolzun, may your road be white, because white is the sacred color. It's a color of blood for someone.
Ruakere, Bidasagekwe, and David, thank you so much for joining this program.